Hi everyone, welcome back to Winging It. My name's Rebecca. If you're new here, you're very welcome, and if you're returning, if you've been around for a long time, welcome back. This week we're in week 3 of our March panel for our 2024 Winging It project, and if you're not sure what we're up to, I will put the playlist at the top of the screen up here so that you can go back and check out all the videos that you might have missed. In January we made a wet landscape panel with an animal in it, and in February we focused on snowdrops and created a piece that included some text and some poetry. Now in March we've taken our inspiration from crocuses, and last week we left our panel looking a bit like this. And so this week we're going to put the centres on most of those flowers that we added last week, and we're also going to learn how to make a crocus out of a strip of fabric or ribbon. So really exciting. Some very simple embroidery stitches today, very easy and accessible for a complete beginner. So I hope you're going to play along and join in some of the fun. So let's gather our bits and pieces and let's get stitching. Okay, so this is where we're up to. We started March by creating our background with some ink and some surface stitching, and then last week we added our fabric manipulated flowers so that we had some texture on our panel, and this week we're going to add some crocuses. So if you remember, we left some spaces in our design for some crocuses. We're also going to add some flower centres as well. So we're going to finish off our daffodils and make our hellebores look more like hellebores, and add some centres to the forsythia and these longwort flowers as well. And the eagle-eyed amongst you will notice that I've already made a start. So this was me testing out a design for my daffodil cup, and if I just move the fabric, hopefully you can see that we've made a little trumpet, and inside we've created some stamen and a centre for our daffodil. So I'm going to start by showing you how I manage that. So I've got some just normal machine thread in my needle, and I've got here some strips of just sari silk ribbon, and I'm going to take a piece of yellow for this. It's probably 10 centimeters long, something like that, but if you haven't got sari silk, you could just use any strips of fabric. You just cut them down into strips. I quite like sari silk because it frays nicely at the edges, so you get a bit of texture on your fabric. So I've just put a knot, decent sized knot, in the end of my thread, and I'm going to start by folding my sari silk down the middle. So I'm just going to kind of finger press that. You can press it with an iron if you want to, but there's really no need. And I'm just going to make that have a little bit of a fold in it, like that. You can offset fold if you want to, so you can fold it so that your edges land at different points, but I think you don't have to worry too much or be too precise. So all I'm going to do is take my needle in at the edge like that, so just a couple of millimeters away from the fold, and I'm just going to take my needle in and out and just do a running stitch all along that folded edge. So you don't need to be right at the fold, just a couple of mils, an eighth of an inch, something like that, up from the fold, and I'm just weaving the fabric backwards and forwards, loading it onto my needle, and essentially I'm just doing a running stitch, but I'm just trying to do it quickly. So I'm just pulling that through, and you can see that is starting to gather up. I want to do that along the whole edge of my folded ribbon. You could use just ribbon, actually. That's another thing that you could use. So don't feel the need to go hunting for sari silk ribbon. I'm using it because it's just something I happen to have in my stash. It's one of those lovely things that I have and don't want to use it all up, so I never use it, and I'm trying to just work my way through things in my stash this year. So as much as I'm looking to nature for my inspiration, I'm also looking to the things in my cupboard for inspiration. Okay, so I've stitched all along the length of that, and I'm just going to pull that thread through and let it come taut, and then I'm just going to keep pulling so that it gathers up like that. And then I want to get my two ends, made a sort of rosette if you like, and I'm going to carry on with that. My two ends to overlap, and I'm just going to stitch through the other layer. So I've essentially caught those together, and I'm just going to do a running stitch up that join, so that my flower centre is caught into a rosette. I've pulled that a little bit to gather it a little bit, but not too much. And then I'm just going to put a really simple quilter's knot. You'll hardly see this, so don't worry too much about having a visible knot. That's why I'm using a thread that blends in. And we've got our little rosette there, so you can just fiddle about with it a little bit to even it out like that. And that's essentially what we're going to do. Now this one I did bigger stitches, so it's not as gathered, but you can play around. The smaller your stitches, the more tightly it's going to gather, and the more sort of ruffles you'll have. So to attach it, I'm just going to re-knot my yellow thread. Just going to show you one of these, and I'll put the other one on at leisure. I'm going to locate it. You can pin it if you want to. Don't think I'm going to worry too much. Just going to bring my needle up where I want that cup to sit. This is slightly fiddly, it's not too bad, but I've brought my thread through from the back of my fabric, just coming out where I want my cup to sit, and I'm just going to catch that folded edge with the thread like that. Then I'm going to use my thumb to hold my daffodil cup in place, and I'm just going to do a little whip stitch around that folded edge. So we're going to just bend our daffodil trumpet over to the side so that we can just see roughly where we want to stitch. If you want to, if it makes it easier, you can just sketch out a little circle so that you know where you want your trumpet to sit. So that will guide you, or your fabric might get in your way. So as long as my stitches are sitting on that line, it will come right. So thumb holding the trumpet, and I can take my thread in, or my needle in rather, on my sketch line, bring it out through the fold at the bottom of my daffodil trumpet, and pull through to hold it in place. I'm just going to work my way around the circle, just catching the trumpet with a little whip stitch, nothing complicated. Just want to hook my needle through so that I catch both the backing fabric and the daffodil trumpet. And you can see as I'm stitching it on, it's starting to stand up a little bit more. So that's how we're going to get our 3D daffodil. I've had a lovely time this week reading all your comments, and it's so great to see that you are liking the bright colours, because I do worry about bright colours. I know that grunge is the trend in textile work at the moment. Everybody likes everything to be a bit grungy looking and vintage, and I do love that. I have to say, I do not want anyone to think that I don't like a bit of tea staining or Rico dyeing. I really do. But I also love colour, and I think if you've been around on this channel for a while, you'll know that most of the time I take inspiration from what's happening in the world around me, and it's one of the wonderful things about living in a rural county in the UK, because you get to see nature really changing all around you. You don't have to go far to see sort of a farmer's field going through its natural cycles, or creatures bursting out of hedgerows and things like that. So it's one of the great joys in my life to just watch the seasons change and just enjoy what nature does without our involvement, really. So most of my work takes inspiration from the world that I see all around me, and there are seasons in the year where earthy tones and more sort of dull colours are more relevant, and there are seasons where bright colours come to the fore. So in January and February we're all a bit more muted, but I think the world is getting brighter again, so let's use it. Now, as I seem to say every week, I do know that not everyone is in the Northern Hemisphere. We've got people tuning in from all over the world, which blows my mind. And so if this doesn't fit with your world, your location, then you adapt. So the principle that we're looking at this month is fabric manipulation, sort of creating our own backgrounds, dyeing and staining with ink, using a bit of textural stitch to add a bit of interest, and then creating some shape and working in 3 dimensions using some fabric manipulation. So that's where we're heading. So I've got a very different looking daffodil trumpet here. I'm loving all the different varieties of daffodil. So now I'm going to take a button, have a look quite closely at the centres of daffodils to work out what to do. I'm going to take a little button, just a 4-hole button there, and I'm going to stitch that on. It's not going to be a functional button, so I don't have to agonise about getting this totally perfect. And please don't come for me in the comments, because there are 1,000,001 ways to do this, and like I say every week, I am just making this up as I'm going along. So I had a bit of a play with one of the daffodils just to make sure that what I wanted to do was going to work. And once I'd seen that it did work, I thought, let's just go for it. So I'm sure there are loads of other ways to make daffodil trumpets, and if you have got a better way, then go for it. Absolutely fine. So hopefully you can see that now that we've stitched that centre on, the petals are starting to pull forward a little bit and stand up a little bit more all by themselves. And I kind of hoped that would happen. That normally happens if you stitch through halfway up a petal. So you can kind of practice it if you use a pin and just put pressure on different parts of your flowers. You can see there, if I press the end of my pin in, that petal folds around it in two directions. So if I was to put a stitch there, that would force that petal to curl up and hold in place. So as we've stitched on our daffodil centre, these petals have pulled forward because we've essentially put pressure on the petal and force it to sort of fold in. And so we've created quite a lively looking daffodil there. Right, so I've stitched my button on, and if you look into daffodils, I don't think we look into flowers particularly very often, certainly not daffodils because they've got that trumpet, but they do have stamen on the inside. So I've created some here. Not sure how happy I am with it, but we'll just go with it. So I've got a little bit of my variegated green thread. I think it's going to work better this time because I'm on a lighter shade of green. Let me just get a needle. And all I did to create those stamen was I stitched through from the front and then came back up through the button and just tied a little knot. Like that. And then I repeated that across the other holes in the button. You can always trim these back if they're too long. It's not a problem. Everything's adjustable. But it's better to make it too long than too short because you can always cut it back. You can't add it once you've made it too short. So okay. That just gives us some little stamen that stick up. Again, there'll be loads of different ways to do this, but I think that way works just fine. Go. Hope you can see that. Mobile petals all around it. That's how I've made my daffodil. Okay, so let's have a look at our primrose now, and to create this I've got 2 strands of yellow embroidery thread, and you could use a more orangey one if you wanted to. I've got this sort of buttery yellow, and we're going to start by adding a little bit of stitched detail. And again, you could do this in whatever way you like, but I'm just going to come up somewhere near the centre to avoid the lumps. And I'm going to put a little detached chain stitch just at the centre. So to make that, I've brought my thread through, I'm looping round, taking my needle back in the same place that my thread came up. Got a lump in my wadding here that's hard to get my needle through. Then I'm going to bring my needle back up from the back to the front and making sure that the needle is coming up inside that loop, and then I'm going to pull through like that, and that's going to catch that loop, and then I'll hop over the loop and take my thread back down. That puts a little teardrop shape, and I'm just going to repeat that process on each petal. So I've got a petal there, kind of, let's do a couple on each petal. You could do straight stitches if you wanted to, but I think this is going to look nice. So again, round in a loop, bring your thread back up and hop over the loop and back down through the fabric. We're going to create something of a little kind of star at the centre. And again, we're kind of applying pressure to these petals in certain locations. So we want to kind of cause them to bounce up a little bit, and what we do next is going to be even more effective for that. A little stitch near the centre, and around to the front. I'm just going to turn my work, it's easier for me to make these. I'm kind of facing forward with my needle. I always want to stitch forward. A little, almost like a star of detached chain stitches. And then what we're kind of doing here is something called a lazy daisy, which we'll do more of next week. So we'll get a clearer sense, but we're basically making a ring of detached chain stitches that are worked kind of in a circle, all starting at the centre, and that can create a kind of daisy flower, but we'll do that next week. But we're just adding a little bit of stitch detail to the centre of the flower. Now primroses have a kind of almost like a hole at the centre, and I've got some beads just here, and I think I'm going to, let's audition a couple of beads. Quite like that dark green one. However, it's not quite big enough. That one works quite well, I think. It's not, again, quite big enough. I don't think any of those are going to be quite big enough. I've just come back to my primrose, which I wasn't happy with, so I've unpicked it and I've stitched in my centre again, but with a darker yellow thread, and I thought I'd give another go to one of the beads because I thought the dark green centre was just too strong. And I do have these dark green kind of very round ball beads, and wondered whether they might work. And back down where I brought the needle up, and that's going to pull the bead over to the side and give us a little round flower centre. Still think it's a bit strong, but just trying to use what I've got. So for the Forsythia, really easy. I've got some green thread here. This is my variegated green, it's this one, and I've got some yellow beads here. These are quite a sunny yellow, and all we're going to do is put a bead at the centre. So let's do this little cluster of Forsythia here. I'm going to bring my needle up from the back, so catch a bead on your needle, take your needle back down, and that puts your little flower centre in. And if you desperately want to have your bead sitting so that the hole is coming forward, you just do it again, coming in from the opposite direction, and that will make sure that the hole in your bead sits upright like that. And then you can work along to your next Forsythia flower. You want to pull these quite tight, and that's going to help apply pressure to the flower, make it sort of cup inwards, just like we've done before. So hook a bead on, back down through the fabric, get tangled on the other flowers, and then I'm going to do it again from a different direction so that the whole of the bead sits upright like that. And that's going to create my Forsythia. A really simple centre for this one. Just takes a little bit of time, and I would say that probably every 5 beads you put on, you want to tie it off at the back, because then if your thread should break, you only lose a couple of beads rather than all of them. Okay, so I've put in my Forsythia centres, and I've done my other 2 daffodil centres. So finally, for our flower centres, we're going to do our hellyballs, and we can have a bit of a play with these. I've just got a scrap of yellow felt here, and what I want to do is just roughly cut a circle-ish shape. I'm just rolling the felt around in my scissors. So I've got something close to a circle. If you want to draw the circles beforehand, you can, but I'm just going to eyeball it. So that's going to go in the centre. I've got some of my variegated green, and again, if you want to, you can pin this in place, but I'm not going to worry. So I'm just going to come up from the back, and I'm going to put some French knots on this first of all. So at the centre, I just want to make a little circle of French knots, not covering up the whole of the felt. I want this to stand out, which is why I'm using felt. I want to pad it a little bit. So we're going to hold our thread towards us, sit our needle on the surface, wrap over the top of that thread a couple of times, and then take our needle down, not quite in the same place but close to. Then we're going to pull, catching that needle on the back. Then we're going to pull on this thread a little bit until the wraps of our knot sit on the surface of the felt. We're going to keep some tension on that and pull through, and let go of our thread at the last minute, and that will make a little French knot at the centre. So let me just show you that again. Bring our needle through from the back, hold the thread towards ourselves, needle on the thread, wrap twice, needle back through close to where it came up, pull on our working thread, keep it under tension and pull through. Just going to add a few more of those. When you're happy that you've got a sort of centre for your hellebore, what we're going to do, just going to add a couple more, is do something like a French knot, but we're going to put it on a stick. And we're going to do something called a pistol stitch. I think that will do for the centre. So I'm going to bring my needle up just in amongst those French knots that I've just stitched, and I'm going to go as if I'm going to make a French knot. So I'm going to wrap twice, but this time instead of going down where my thread came out, I'm going to take it out into the petals of the flower, still keeping under tension, pull through. Now we're going to put a bunch of these in all the way around. It's going to make it look more like a hellebore. There's our hellebore centre. Got our little cluster of French knots and then our pistol stitch stamen. Hopefully you can also see that these petals are starting to fray a little bit because I'm handling them, and I don't mind that at all. That's no big deal to me because they're just going to look a little bit more sort of natural and weathered and organic, so I've got no problem with that. So I'm going to add in my piece upside down. I'm going to add in my other primrose centres and my hellebore centres, and then we'll be back to do our crocuses, which I know is what you're all waiting for. So I'll just fill these in and I'll be back in just a blink of an eye for you to put in my crocuses. Okay, so here's where we're up to so far. We've got our daffodils, we've got our primroses stitched, and we've put in our hellebores. I think these might be my favourites. I think they are just lovely. So let's learn how to make a fabric crocus. I'm just going to move this to the side so that you can see clearly what I'm doing. I've got here just some ordinary machine thread threaded up into my needle, and what we need for this is a length of ribbon. So you can do this with sari silk ribbon. This is showing up quite blue on camera, but it is a lovely like royal purple colour. So I've got a strip about 10 centimetres, actually a little bit longer, maybe 13 centimetres long, but 10 centimetres will do. And I'm going to start by just folding it in half and finding the centre. And I'm going to take my knotted thread up through that fold there. And that just gives me an idea of where the centre is. So I'm going to do what I did with the daffodils and just put a small running stitch through the centre. Now this step you might not need depending on which fabric you're using. Silk doesn't crease particularly well on command, so it does get rumpled but not on command. You have to sort of work at it a little bit. I'm going to pull that nice and tight to create a kind of bow, and I'm going to use my quilter's knot to put a little knot to keep that tight. And I'm going to cut that off quite close to the knot so that I've got my thread separate. Now you can do this with paper, works really easy with paper. You don't need to stitch it, you just need to hold it. So what I'm going to do now is twist at that centre. I'm going to twist it round twice. The gathering just helps to make the fabric do what you want it to do. And what you should notice is that you've got one side goes concave, so that has curved up towards me, and one side goes convex, so that's curved inward. It's gone away from me, and that's what you want to take as your guide. So I'm going to fold concave inside the convex like that to make a sort of curved top. They're both looped inside each other now to make a convex shape. So yeah, just sort of bends round at the top like that. And I want to line up my two sides of my petal, and I'm going to knotted my thread again. So I'm lining up my two bits of ribbon, and depending on how big I want my crocus petal, I'm going to come up through both layers of my ribbon, and I'm going to gather them up again at the bottom. Like that. I've just done a running stitch through the width of the ribbon and pulling it tight, and I'm going to pull that as tight as I can, and again I'm going to do a little quilter's knot at the bottom. Use my nail to keep those wraps in place, pull through, and then I'm going to cut off my thread. So now I've got this little kind of domey petal that is crocus shaped, and at the bottom this little excess bit I can just trim off, just don't cut through your stitches. And that is essentially it. I'm just going to make loads of those. If you're worried about your petal not sitting quite right, you can, if you want to, just get the tip of an iron and just set that crease at the top. Just to help them to sit where they belonged. So I bring back in my panel. I'm going to put a crocus here, I think. Let's have a nice magenta one first of all. I need to trim that one off a little bit. There we go. I'm going to pop this on here, and suddenly we have something that's starting to look like a crocus. All I need to do is tuck it in. You can tuck it behind something if you want to, but we are going to put some foliage on. Bring my thread up from the back, and I'm just going to add a little stitch there across the bottom. You can use your threads to kind of pinch it in a bit at the bottom if you want to, just to hold it in place. just attaching it to the background. And you can, if you want to, leave it at just one petal, but I'm going to overlap a couple to make it look like my crocus is opening up. So I've just got a second magenta petal like that. I'm just going to sit it over the top of that first one and put a couple of stitches through. Hold it down. There we go. And just a bit of play with how that's sitting if you want to. Like that. So I've got some very frayed orange sari silk here, and I'm just going to make a little spiral with that, just rolling it up. I want lots of frayed bits. Really, that's what I'm after. Just going to trim that off. I want to cut my thread. I can tuck this inside like that. And pull my thread through to the back. As long as I'm happy that that's secure, that means that should my crocus ever open up, on my panel I've got this lovely orange fluffy stamen poking through, which is what crocuses have. So that's my first crocus. Kind of squish that down a little bit, bring it up as best as I can. Finish off my thread on the back, and then I'll show you what happens when we add a bit of a leaf shape. Got our crocus there, and you can either put another flower over the front of that, or you can create a bit of a leaf shape out of some sari silk or just a piece of ribbon if you want to. And a very similar way, you can gather it up and add it over the top like that, and that will cover up your join, and then you've got a little leaf coming off as well. So I'm going to add in some of those. I think I'm going to add some more crocuses in some of these gaps. So we have one there. Don't want to overly cover up. Definitely want one here. Might do another one of pinky ones, but I've got one there, and I can, let me show you how I can build it. So I'm rolling up my orange braid fabric like that, and I can tuck that in there, tuck my other flower around, and that's a really nice little crocus shape that I can stitch together and then stitch onto my background. It might be fun to have some more of the orange showing through, so I can just put them together like that. Just got two of my little cup petals. I've made a flash of orange in the middle, and suddenly we've got a little bit of a crocus going on. That's very much like a crocus to me. And we can stitch through it, attach it onto our background. Okay, so here's where we're up to. We've put in a selection of crocuses, and I've just put my aperture in just so that you can see how it's looking. I think I probably need another crocus here, maybe a purple one or whatever, and I've put in some orange stamen at the centre, just peeking out there. And if you want those to show a little bit more clearly, you can always catch a stitch back or bring it forward or whatever, and just carry on manipulating your fabric. So next week we're going to add in some more stitch just to sort of blend out our flowers into the background, and we're going to add in some stems and things like that. So we'll add the finishing touches to our piece, but I'm really loving the way this is coming along. I hope you're enjoying it too. Can't wait to see your versions. Do share at hashtag FSH Winging It 24, and do tag me in at Feather Stitch House so that I'm guaranteed to see your posts. You can also post in our Facebook group, and I'll put details for that in the description below. So that's it for this week. Have a great week adding in your flower centres and making your crocuses, and I will see you in next week's video. Take care. Bye.